Good morning, everybody. I'm being told to bang a gavel. Unfortunately, I left my gavel at home today. My name is Matt Turk, and I can tell from the speaker presenter slides up here that I actually have their... Hello. Welcome to the panel on the value of visualization. I'm honored to be your moderator. I see that, embarrassingly enough, there's a slide with my bio up here as well. My name is Matt Turk, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Information Sciences. I spend a lot of time working on understanding how people utilize visualizations and data analysis through scholarly works as well as in industry and so forth. And my background is in astronomy. But I'm honored to be able to moderate this panel with a collection of people from a variety of different, very interesting places about the value of visualization. One of the things that we talk about in some of the classes that I teach in the School of Information Science is that we want to use visualization as a technique to extract information from data. Much of the brain is composed, or much of the brain is utilized to synthesize data from the visual cortex, and we have a reasonably good intuitive understanding of how that data comes into us and how we understand it and so on. And so being able to transform numeric, quantitative, qualitative, categorical data into something that the brain can understand at an intuitive level is really where a lot of the work that's going on in visualization happens. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce people that are on the panel, and sadly I didn't look at the slides in advance, and so we're going to have to jump around a little bit. It's not going to be in strict monotonic distance increase here. So our first panelist, and what I would ask is if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest and experience in visualization. We have Jakub Slomcyznski. Did I say that?
Pretty
That's
close.
the gentle way of saying no, isn't it?
I'm used to it. It's okay. It's Slomczynski, but you're pretty close. I'm a product manager at Oath, which used to be Yahoo. I'm actually responsible. My team is responsible for user engagement, data analytics. We have designed and built internal analytics tool that our customers throughout the company use to understand how users engage to our properties. So, how many users we have, how much time they spend, and so on. And so that's kind of what my role is. And, data visualization plays a big part in it because we operate on a very, very large scale of data. And our job is to, provide an easy way of users to get access to it and make, business decisions, understand how their products are performing.
Great. Well, thank you. Next up, we have Chris Sinclair.
So I work at AbbVie. It's a biopharmaceutical company in Chicago, just north of Chicago. I like to think I got into data visualization to get back at my dad, so I have father issues. He was a blue-collar guy. I always wanted to be actually a cartoonist. And he said, art's a hobby, not a job, and very, very strict. And so I became a biochemist. And now I like to tell him that one of the things I do at work is I draw pictures. Of course, I draw pictures with data. But it's a wonderful way to convey complex messages. And working at, our company's got 28,000 people in Lake County alone. There's, 8,000 people. We have a lot of challenges around communication with each other. And we have a lot of debates over what something means. And so when we visualize data for our teams and within teams, we make it less about the person, we make it more about this concrete thing we can describe. So I see it as a real way to start to bring teams together to be more efficient, in addition to some of the other things the folks have said.
Thank you. So, Adam Weiss.
Yeah, thanks. I work for AGCO and GSI specifically, and we're probably, I would say, of this group, probably the salt of the earth. We work with the farmers who grow pigs and chickens and eggs and corn and beans. Similar to the speaker we just heard, a lot of these industries typically aren't leaders of technology. So our challenge is to help these farmers use technology to improve their operations. So we automate a lot of the operations in raising pigs and chickens. We have electronic control systems that control these environments, and we gather a ton of data on the environment: temperature, humidity, CO2, ammonia levels, the operational state of the equipment, the fans, the heaters, things like that. And the challenge is, now that we have all this data, how do you present it in a way that someone who is not necessarily tech savvy, who raises pigs, who's very skilled at what they do, but doesn't understand what a regression is, or how do you present data so that they can extract data from it and learn how they can use less energy or use less feed to raise these animals? So very challenging.
Thank you. And Dan Sherman.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning. My name is Dan Sherman. I'm with Graybar Electric out of St. Louis. We are an electrical wholesale distributor throughout the U.S., about 8,000 employees, 250 plus locations. Coming up on our 150th anniversary, so we've been around for a little while. We are fairly new to the Research Park family, just started in the spring. Around the analytics space, I'm responsible for all data and the innovation practice for Graybar. And to the question, I guess, as far as visualization is concerned, I'm always up for a challenge. I came into an organization where if we had a red dial versus a green dial, that meant good versus bad, and that's about as advanced as we got with our analytics. So, and that was in Excel. So we've actually, in 2 years that I've been with Graybar, we've made some huge strides, and couldn't be more excited to participate this morning.
Thank you very much. I've prepared a couple questions that are sort of designed to be conversation starters, and one of the things that I'm picking up on that I want to return to in a few minutes is that we have different people representing different stages in kind of the visualization pipeline. But I wanted to start out and ask you, and this is designed to be a very open-ended question, but I can personally recall times when I've had an aha moment where I've seen a visual representation of data, or I've seen a visual representation of a particular experiment or measurement or something, and I had a moment where I said aha, and that was mediated through the visualization. And in particular, what I wanted to know was, have you had any particular moments that you can recall there being just an aha moment where you see something represented in a way that you hadn't expected that led you down a path? And this time, unlike with the slides, actually, I'm going to go ahead and start closest to me and then monotonically increase in distance.
I should have sat farther down. You know, there was a project we did with one of the with our Lake County site. It involved about 1,100 people, and we were looking at the types of work they do, trying to come up with some standard cost models. So a lot of people, complex data, what do they do day to day, some of which is directly related to manufacturing, some of which is meetings and performance reviews, sort of the softer stuff. And the aha moment came, it was interesting, it was a very simple pie chart, it looked a whole lot like Pac-Man. And we were all focusing on the wrong part of the Pac-Man. So it was interesting, you know, if you imagine Pac-Man, the yellow part, right? Well, Pac-Man has a black mouth. And we were all talking about the yellow piece because that's what was affecting our cost, our manufacturing, those sorts of things. And finally, somebody in the room said, what about, they didn't say Pac-Man's mouth, but what about this other sliver? And suddenly, it really changed the conversation because it was about all the time we were spending on what later we would call maybe non-value add or lower value add, but it was this quiet time, this lost time during people's days. So, you know, the Pac-Man was brightly colored, it was easy for us to focus on, and this other part of the diagram faded away. And so it really, kind of the aha for me was, you know, always be careful, think about white space, think about what colors you're using. If you're making something pop, are you making the right or the wrong thing pop? And that completely changed our approach. We went from thinking, let's look at manufacturing, let's look at the manufacturing lines, let's get in and do more training, to, if we talk about the smaller sliver, Pac-Man's mouth, why do we have all of our manufacturers in meetings? Why do we have so many of these softer things? What if we could turn some of that time into the Pac-Man? And that was a big aha for us as we started to develop things later.
So thank you. And actually, I want to note that we've already had mentions of several different colors affecting the way that people influence things, and so maybe we'll return to that. We had the red-green dial, which I suppose, where I come from in Michigan, would actually mean it would be a dial made out of duct tape. But then, the yellow-black Pac-Man plot. So let's note that for later. So maybe, Adam?
I guess a few different aha moments. One specifically to seeing event in the data, and then one more, it's almost kind of UX related, but UX related to tools for users to visualize data. So the first is actually in a different industry. It was in monitoring wind turbines. And trying to figure out what was going on with a gearbox, and couldn't figure out what was going on with it until you see the time series data with clear impacting going on, and from that being able to figure out, there was a broken tooth on a gear. But when you actually see it and you can tell there's something banging, that's an aha moment. For us at GSI, aha moment we had, not with seeing data in a plot, but on legacy systems, we always present data to customers, and we would present, here are the graphs that you need to see to understand your water usage or feed usage for your animals. And 9 times out of 10, the customer would say, that's great, but what I really want is something tweaked on that just slightly. And we would spend engineering hours for every customer to develop a visualization that they wanted. Whereas today, we have a much more generic approach on visualization of giving the customer the tools that are, again, still easy enough that a hog farmer can do it, but yet present the data in the format that's meaningful to them.
Can you say, and I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative here to ask, can you say when you say that the tools that a hog farmer can use to do it, can you explain what you mean a little bit more by that?
So we have developed a SaaS system that it's kind of, if you think of an agriculture IoT system, we have sensors at the farm to collect all kinds of data. We store it in the cloud, and then have tools to visualize the data and create custom dashboards. Mm-hmm. We also have tools to create custom reports. So if we wanted to, the customer wanted to visualize a temperature trend, we may create a plot to do that for them, similar to how you might do that in Excel. But maybe they don't want to just look at a trend of the last 30 days. Maybe they want to look at this flock versus the last flock, and or maybe they want to. And maybe as we go into the conversation, we'll talk more about analytics and how to actually visualize analytics. But the idea is that you don't pin down or constrain how the customer presents the data to themselves, whether it be by dictating what type of format the data is in, whether it's a line chart or a bar chart or anything like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for me, it's a little different. I would say the aha moment for me would be where we, for our product and our company, made a decision to change how we compute things. And what I mean by that is, in the old days, we would have a set of requirements, use cases that we need to support, counting different metrics for specific different data sets. So everything was pre-computed when we were aggregated data, and then was quickly served to our users. But the limitations of that, we were basically prepared to answer questions that we knew ahead of time people wanted to ask. But it created a problem where, what if somebody want to ask a different question from a question? Like they got some data points, they say, oh, it's interesting, I wonder, what if I look at a specific different cut? And if we didn't have a pre-computed part for it, you couldn't do it. So our shift was, instead of doing a lot of aggregations, we presume understanding what the question was, we were not computing basically at request time. So, and the challenge was around how do you count identifiers, which are non-additive metrics. So we did a lot of innovation in tech that allow us to solve the problem, to be able to compute quickly, which speed is always important for users when they use a tool. You don't want to wait half an hour to get a number back. So a lot of aha moments came about us being able to solve this problem. And then the moment you have this ability, you can ask questions and you can kind of deep dive, ask more questions, and investigate data problems or data changes. That is such a large opportunity of all the different things that open up to you that you probably didn't think was there. To a point, I think that now our users don't even realize that they can ask so many questions because they were never in a position to be able to do so. And now I think they're probably underutilizing the tool because they don't realize how much more it can do for them. And on top of that, there's a bunch of other different things that we could do with it that we couldn't before. So, for example, understand user retention or understand how one product impacts the other or together in terms of how users traverse different sites. So basically, for us, would be the innovation from the old ways to new ways that totally changed the ballgame for us and open up all the different possibilities that we never knew we had, basically.
Thank you. Okay.
So I've got two quick ones. First one, probably AHA for programmatic for us when we started was I was naive enough to think coming in that something as simple as a revenue number is a revenue number is a revenue number, no matter how you look at it. So the first round of visualizations on our sales environment showed that very clearly there is heavy, heavy bias no matter where you go, no matter what you do. So the reality of being able to have a strength of visualization showed when we thought it was the right revenue number and we get the executive audience, we found out where that bias really laid around, well, I don't include freight, I don't include this, I don't include that. Prior to that, it was, again, Excel spreadsheets, it was raw data, it was manners in which people had to defend their bias towards what was in front of them. So visualization brought that to bear much, much better on an actual use case, and we get aha moments literally every day now, which I could go for hours on. But one of the big ones for us was we had our first IoT project where we were streaming energy usage or energy management data. And the intent was for our practice, our big data practice, to see if we could actually technically handle this streaming data. One of the offshoots of the visualization we provided to our facilities people was that they were able to see they recently replaced controllers on 3 of our HVAC units in a pretty large office building we've got in St. Louis. It was found through the visualizations that those 3 controllers were bad. The HVAC units never shut down after the repair technicians left. Historically, their visualization of that would have been the monthly bill that they'd seen to find out how much they actually used. In this case, it was found that by having that visualization, they were able to diagnose and quickly resolve that, whereas otherwise it likely could have burned up those 3 HVAC units and no one would have known otherwise. So things like that have come up constantly for us now.
So thank you. One thing topic that I'm kind of picking up from this is that there are different ways that we construct visualizations, and in particular different ways that each of our panelists sit inside the visualization pipeline, from the actual visualizing of data to produce a concrete outcome, to development of tools to construct dashboards and so on and so forth. And a topic that comes up when studying effectiveness of visualization is how the person either generating the visualization or the person generating the tools for the visualization is consciously aware of their audience. I've heard this broken down as preparing a visualization for yourself, for a peer, and then for someone that doesn't share perhaps the visual language or the jargon. When you're preparing a visualization, and particularly for something that's in the realm of big data, as it were, how do you think about guiding them based on your audience? And this time, in deference to Chris, we can start at the other end.
I had a good answer.
May not be the right fit for the topic, but I would say as a big data team, our ultimate goal and vision is to get out of the visualization business. We have data scientists throughout our company, and my ultimate vision is that they can create their own visualizations without the technical skill sets that we have today. So part of what we do around that, we've split into a bimodal enterprise around analytics. Mode 1 being simply that it is the operational, transactional, daily outputs that everybody looks at to see the health of the business. Our mode 2 is our advanced analytics or our big data practice. We still do visualizations for numerous executives and team members in the field, but we are bringing on technologies now where they can simply enter a question as they would a Google search and have it be represented as that visualization that they think is most appealing or that they would like to consume. And so for us, those technologies are a huge part of our world, because to get the data in a manner in which they can consume it, that's our primary charter. So ultimately, I don't want the team that we have assembled to be the ones to say, I don't like the red pie chart, I want the blue pie chart. I want the actual consumers to be able to do that. And that's where we spend the majority of our time around visualizations. One, how can we make them self-sufficient? And two, utilizing tools also that get into a new realm of associative search and some other things where, again, I don't have to know how many questions they're going to ask of the data. It's inherent in that visualization output. They can cascade to any granularity they want and find those answers and limit our actual development time of the visualization itself.
Thank you. So if I can ask a follow-up, have you seen, you say that wanting to be able to ask questions similar to as you would Google, have you seen a marked decrease in the time that it takes to onboard someone in order to synthesize information through visualizations?
It really has. So not too much name dropping, but we've employed a solution called ThoughtSpot that's fairly new to the market that is a great example of that you can log in as a CFO and see a blank white screen and literally start typing what you want to see and have it represented graphically, and then you have very simple icons and tools to change that from different types of charts. Now, you're not going to get into the prescriptive world with that. You're not going to get really advanced in your models, but that's the world where we spend the most of our time, though, is on the more historic transactional analytics, and that's what we're trying to offset with those types of tools. And there's really no training. It literally is type in a question and have it represented.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for me, our vision of our product was to basically make it, we want to empower our users to, on their own, be able to build their own dashboards, their reports, in a very intuitive tool. So, we're trying to keep innovating and building a tool that it's very easy to use. And in our world, we have some people that are very technical. They're, we call our power users, but we also have a group of people that are not technical. And our goal is to design the tool that supports all, different skills levels of technical. So not everybody has to know how to write a SQL query to be able to get the data, right? So we build a UI stack that is easy to learn without too much heavy training, and allows anybody really to build quick analytics for themselves. And that's kind of what we see the direction going, providing a better self-service tool that's very intuitive and easy to use, also quick to use as well.
Thank you. And for those of you with the bingo cards, make sure you mark SQL.
So I'd say there's definitely a trend here, and what Dan's trying to do and what we're trying to do as well is remove ourselves from the creators of the visualizations and give the tools to the customer to be able to do that themselves, regardless of the industry, regardless of if it has anything to do with big data or not. But the key is to start with trying to understand what it is the customer is trying to do, what is the result they're trying to get at the end of the day, and be able to provide the data in the back end that can create the visualizations. So understanding what is it that they want to accomplish, providing good, clean data, and then the tools that to visualize that. But I agree completely. Longer term, we don't want to be in the visualization business. Ultimately, I would say, and it's probably outside the scope of a visualization discussion, but if AI is good enough, maybe you don't have to visualize the data and you can just get answers. But a picture does speak 1,000 words.
So I'll break the trend. So when I got hired for my last job, the VP turned to me and said, I need a positive disruptor. And that usually is the guy who disagrees with everybody else in the room, but does it with a smile on his face. I actually agree with, I love the democratization. I completely understand where you guys are coming from. And frankly, self-service is really important, and have done projects with our leadership to give them exactly that. Why do I have to produce slides every week? Just give you the power to make what you want, right? I think where I maybe disagree or would challenge that a little bit is the sense that I could give people the tools to build a house, and that neighborhood of houses would probably look pretty ramshackle because there's a skill set behind designing these things. And so I think we can give them simple tools, and I think it makes sense, but I think it's also important to think about what it is we are asking of the audience who's consuming the information. So are they exploring the data? Like we saw with Quicket, you might look at a map and just try to understand what's going on. You can't predict exactly the analysis when you're exploring. Are you wanting people to convey a specific message? This particular intersection had way more crashes. We should do something here. So I'm going to create a visualization around that. Or do I want them to react? Here's an individual police officer who has instantaneous, near instantaneous feedback on what they're doing. Those are three different sets of things. And some of that could be reasonably self-served, and some of those other things are harder because there may be a truth to convey. And I know you guys get that. And I think the other piece about it is visualization. So data is human-centered, and design is human-centered. And I think as we think about what we're conveying in these pretty visualizations aren't just pretty for a reason, right? It's not just art, but it's how might we increase someone's understanding of what's going on. And so I think approaching some of these visualizations with that design thinking hat probably can serve us pretty well. And I think both worlds coexist, so I'm in full agreement and just would do a yes and on it.
So that brings up kind of an interesting jumping off point, particularly because there's this dichotomy between building the tools for visualization and applying those tools. And there are different ways that utilizing visualization practices in tool design, are how you would utilize visualization practices in tool design, and how you would utilize them as someone that would visualize. And I was wondering if perhaps we could hear a little bit about if and how you incorporate visualization best practices, or the topic of AI came up, and I know there's been research into automated and sort of guided visualization. If you have any thoughts on how best practices or guided visualizations could.
I can add a little bit. So I would say, and it's in relation to the last point, the big differentiator there, I believe, is the term discovery. So if you have an audience that are data discovery bound, meaning that they're truly trying to dig and find the reason why, for us, that's where we get much more heavily involved. That's where we're starting to test AI capabilities as it pertains to that individual user of what they're always going after, and at some point they don't look for it and it represents it to them. For us, even in that world though, what we go after is, and this is extremely hard, is why do I give you a 5-page or 5-tab dashboard when you have one data point that you need to take action on? That to me is a bigger paradigm shift for our company that we will forever fight that battle of, and employing way too much just in case versus understanding what is the discovery for and what are they trying to accomplish, and being able to represent that in the parameters they believe is good, bad, and otherwise, so they can pinpoint that action they're going to take from the insight. So we just frankly don't have a lot of discoverers. We have a lot of consumers, and that's where we end up a little bit a little different in that regard.
So in terms of best practices, to me, there's a couple of different areas to look at. One is not just the visualization or the ease of use of the tool, but also how do you make sure that data that you're serving to the user is correct, right? Because you can have the coolest looking UI, but if the data behind it is garbage, people might make a bad decision on it, right? So that's, to me, a big part of it. So for us, what we kind of employ, we call it data governance. So we have sort of different standards or rules for our, for the properties that we serve. So that, when anybody wants to send us data, they have to adhere to certain guidelines that we set, that we want to make sure that they understand what is a user, what is a page view, different definition of metrics to make sure the instrument, their property is correctly, so the data that we collect is correct, and it's that we count things correctly and we measure things correctly for our users. So that also establishes a trust with our users because they know that when they get data from us, it is correct, right? Because they understand that what principles we have put behind it. Now, of course, there's mistakes, people find issues, and they get fixed. But the idea is everybody in the company kind of agrees to a set of standards, and then they apply when they, instrument their sites. To me, that's a big part. It's a good best practice to have to make sure you have good visualizations, not just the pretty pictures and so on, but the data itself is solid. Second piece is we're lucky enough that we have a design team we get to work with. So we'd have different design languages that we can use that that team kind of comes up with that we can then implement in our products. So that's there's a design standard. The third thing is we do a constant user studies of our users. So every quarter we meet with different users from different backgrounds and have them play with our product and just observe them and see what works well for them, what doesn't. So we always want to get the feedback from our users and improve upon that to make sure we build a good self-service tool. So that's another good practice from that perspective. And lastly is use your own product too. I think this is a good one because it creates it's a different perspective because if you can't use the tool, how would you expect somebody else to use it? Now, you of course have a certain bias from yourself that you have a certain skill set, background. So if it works for you, it might work for people in that type of a group, but it might not work for others. So it's not the only measure, but it is definitely one measure. If you can't use it, you can't expect other people to use it. So those are kind of the four things I would say that are pretty important.
So I want to highlight. I think this notion of the social contract between the you call it data governance.
Right.
I think that's something that maybe we want to circle back to a little bit later because I think that's a pretty interesting area that we could
Sure.
talk about.
Something that we're just starting to explore now, we're developing here at the Research Park, and we need help, by the way, I'll plug that, but is not just, I would say, traditional data visualization, but how to visualize some analytics. So, for example, and I don't know if this is a best practice, this is something we're just exploring now, our customers, they know their industry really well, but they're not data scientists, they're not statisticians, they're not mathematicians. We can't expect them to know that language. So, but the insights that they want to gain from that data requires that skill set. So we're looking at how do we visualize something complex in a simple way that a pig farmer can figure out how to use less energy on his pig farm. So for example, to do that, he might want to create a regression model where he wants to analyze his energy consumption. How can you visualize that without knowing SAS or knowing Minitab? So we came up with this idea of making a visualization of a tool like that. So a simple selector of what you want to analyze, a simple selector of the things that you think affect that. So a pig farmer would say, I want to analyze my energy consumption. I think my fan run times, I think the outside temperature, I think the inside temperature affects that, and create a model for me. And then really simply UI with sliders, let him change each of those inputs and see how it affects his output. Now that's something easy enough that a farmer can do and gain value from, but it's not, he doesn't understand a regression algorithm, doesn't understand statistics tools. But he can still get the value from the data, whereas just putting on a graph wouldn't necessarily give him that value.
So I have a follow-up question to that. One thing that is often easy to convey is, if you improve this portion of your process, you get a 10x improvement, as opposed to something like if you improve, this portion, you'll get 1% or 2%, and then you continually improve, and then ultimately it adds up to 15 to 20% improvement. Have you found that with the tools that you're building, that in particular, that disparity between the large scale, wow improvement as opposed to the consistent overall small scale improvement has been a challenge? And I'm asking Adam specifically, and then we're going to.
Yeah, so specifically I would say for our customers, these industries are typically very tight margins, and any marginal improvement would be, looked at with a lot of scrutiny by our customers. So not a problem for us.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think one of the best practices we use with really any data analysis is a very simple sort of three-step model: practical, graphical, analytical, and it's really a walk. And so practical gets to, is the data good? Do I understand the data? What's even in here? The graphical is where you start to play with it, and that's where you start to funnel things down a bit. And then the analytical can be behind the scenes, but at the end, is your analysis valid? And so that's a key best practice that I've seen some of our best analysts apply, and it's simple enough that even a non-analyst can understand. I think something else that I've seen less frequency but consider a best practice is because I love the red and green. So in the culture of our company, we've got red, yellow, green, and I call it allergic to yellow. So everything's green. If you show yellow, it's just as bad as red. You might as well just show red, and it's disruptive because that symbol carries an outsized impact on people's psyche, and it just weighs the conversation. So one of the things I've done and seen other people do, there was a plant we had in Montreal, and they got away from red, green, yellow. The point is still there. Things are fine. Things are not fine. Things are heading towards not fine, right? And what they did was they just got rid of red, yellow, and green and came up with pictures. It was like a bear, a bird, and a dog or something. It has no linkage at all to green, yellow, red. So people have no context. Is a bear good? Is a bear bad? I don't, So once the plant understood, they're like, oh, we're having a bird day. We got to change what we're doing. And that allergy to yellow faded away. And I think that the other thing we did was I banned the word dashboard. I ran a project management office in a medical affairs group, and if I heard dashboard one more time, I was just gonna lose it. So I said, we need something that conveys our progress and how we're doing. People call that a dashboard. But when they say dashboard, they're throwing everything in the kitchen sink, right? It's their dashboard. I said, we need a different word. And so we said, let's just call it splashboard. And we came up with little splashy visuals, and it was still a dashboard. But people were like, well, what's a splashboard? I've never heard of that. Tell us all about that, Chris. And it was really wonderful because there's no baggage. And so reinventing the word, repurposing a word, just like the bear, the bird, and the dog, that completely changes how people approach the data and gets you away from the very human reaction of what do I do with this information to how do we start to interact with this and use something. So those are some things that I've seen pretty useful when we're doing it really well.
I would like to note that that cuts out a pretty top-tier Meatloaf song from karaoke night at your company, I'm afraid. If we can sort of change gears a little bit to talk about a little more technical things. What are some of the biggest technical challenges to visualization that you anticipate as we move forward? And this time it can be unordered responses. Maybe I should order it.
I'll go first, it's fine. I would think the challenge definitely is, because of the large data set that probably will keep on growing, is to be able to compute this and serve this data in a very still quick manner that everybody wants to see their data. Like, people don't want to wait a minute to get something back. They want to wait seconds, right? So it's a challenge of the large volume that will get larger and then still be able to compute in a very quick manner to provide data. So I think this is where there's still a lot of innovation that can happen, especially with cloud and different technologies you can use. Different algorithms you can apply to make things better. So, I think that's probably where the growth is going to be.
So, can I follow up on that with a quick question? A lot of frameworks for visualization that are coming out of things like out of Stanford and University of Washington and so on do visualization locally on data that gets reduced, say, in the local client. Do you see that as being something that's sustainable in the long term? Does there need to be another couple levels between the local client and the remote? Yeah,
I'm not sure if this is where you're getting at, but let me tell you how I think you're asking the question. Are you saying do I need a middle layer, or is just raw event level data and the UI on top of that enough, right? So yeah, it's actually a very good question, because we have some tools that do actually query the raw level data. They don't have the aggregate level, and it works for them. But we have some other tools that don't do that. To me, a lot of that depends on the scope, right? You have to define what is your tool, what do you do and what you don't do, right? If you have a very large scope or too large of a scope, it'd be very difficult to do that at a raw level. But if you're very specific what you are, then you might have a small subset of data, so you can kind of narrow down on what you're doing, and then yeah, you can get more powerful analytics that way. Because you lose some information when you aggregate, right? So if you can get to raw event level data, you can definitely get more out of it, but the challenge is the size, right? So it's how do you control the size? It's always, to me, the speed and the size is always going to be kind of a dials you can have to deal with to and optimize for that.
Do we have anybody else that wants to chat about the...
I can pile onto the same one. So we historically have never had an enterprise data warehouse at Graybar, so we actually now have a 12-node cluster of Hadoop as our enterprise data warehouse, which is kind of unique. The interesting part of that was, and it's in relation to the same challenge, when we started it, there were a few executives pounding their fists wondering why we're spending all the time on the shiny new toy, and we had to take the cluster down for about 2 weeks to apply security principles, and those same executives were pounding their fists wondering when the cluster was going to come back up. So the biggest challenge that we're very paranoid about on a regular basis is ability to scale. So we're already, and there's multiple facets of that. It's not just latency, concurrency issues with users. It's actually the ingest process, how everybody's coming at us with crazy kinds of data that they want to now incorporate into this picture there, or this story they want to tell. Our ability to actually manage that scale and not keep those users waiting either for result access or other terms is something we're constantly challenged with, because we're just not in an investment strategy around this where we put millions behind it. We really scale as we grow, so that's a consistent challenge for us.
Okay. So we have a couple examples of visualization that were provided, and I have up now the Edge dashboard. So Adam, would you like to tell us a little bit about your philosophy in developing this, and tell us and walk us through it a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, this is still a work in progress, but we do have quite a few customers out there using it. The idea, again, behind it was to create a generic platform that a hog farmer or a chicken farmer could present the information most important to him in a format that he wants. So you see on there a bunch of widgets. Each of these widgets is configurable and by the customer, and you can add as many widgets, put them however you want. If you're familiar with, like Salesforce or something like that, creating a dashboard, it's kind of similar to that. So that was kind of the approach, in that it's simple enough that that it can be done by just about anybody, but it's flexible enough that should a customer want a different display format or to show different information, they don't have to come back to us, and we don't have to code up something different. So that was kind of the philosophy behind what you see there.
And do people look at this on a desktop machine, on a laptop, on a mobile phone, mobile device?
Yeah, typically a desktop machine, but tablet devices mostly. We do have mobile phone apps, but the data visualization is not there primarily because of screen size. But
okay. And so we also have a presentation from Dan Sherman. Let me make sure that I can full screen this. So Dan, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about
excuse me. So the reason I provided these, it's a little bit of a different spin towards visualization. So this is one significant move we're making around visualizations is to build our outputs as apps versus utilizing a commercially available tool. So this was built in Node.js. This is our national sales rep dashboard, and I hid the names. Probably shouldn't have put those up there. But the key to it is, historically, this was an old Excelsius dashboard built in Flash that now with the latest browsers started to crash constantly. So instead of building it in some other new visualization tool, we actually built an app. Now, for us, the significance of this is it is much easier for us to scale because this directly hits the data as that individual user wants to provide or to dig deeper into further insights, but also we can build those sliders from left to right. Again, this is a static picture of it, but you can go into multiple different sliders, multiple different views of the data. There's some, we don't have an enterprise-wide CRM that say, hey, this is great because one of the drop-downs shows all their customers. Can we not add a few fields for phone numbers and some more historical data and make this almost kind of a pseudo CRM tool? All kinds of ways we can go with this, but the key for us is the opportunity to build apps for visualizations versus traditional commercially available tool sets is actually an accelerator for us because we can make broad visualizations that can be defined by user. So it's a big, this is our first play in that, but it's a big one for us. And then the other one, if you want to bring that. So this one, this is that thought spot that I mentioned. Just as a quick point, we, in the top search bar there, simply typed in sales 2016. The drop down on the right lets the user decide how they want to visualize it, but when I started this, it was a blank white page. The interesting part for this for us was we had a couple of our key executives in the room when we did the pilot with this, and he kept trying to break it. So one of our top executives, and he'd say, okay, but I want versus 2017. I want with this supplier. I want only GMR. I want, and they just kept typing in the search bar, and it kept representing multiple formats, multiple data objects associated with it, and we didn't have to build anything. So for us, this is those were the two examples for our shop that are going to be significant for the future towards that self-sufficiency and allowing the consumers to really have complete control as to what they want to do with visualizations.
So we have time, I think, for one brief remaining question. We talked a little bit about what are some of the the advances that need to happen, but I wanted to end with the question about how do you approach the problem that was alluded to before about when you apply a reduction, when you apply an aggregation, when you apply any type of data cleaning or dimensionality reduction. How do you approach that from the perspective of attempting to ensure that the representation of that data when it's visualized is not isn't changed or doesn't hide something reasonably important?
You use a lot of asterisks to.
Asterisk, okay.
Yeah.
Let me write that down.
Yeah. So if it's a good audience and a group of folks that I've got some rapport with, there's a story, I don't remember exactly who told it, but it talks about the shape of the Earth. And at one point we thought it was flat, and now we've figured out it was round. But it's not actually round, it's more ovoid. But it's actually not ovoid, it's got some bumps. And actually we're finding out now that it's even different from that. It can maybe even change over time. So there's this path of more wrong to more right. So I want to be less wrong and more right. So I think the visualizations we try to show is to say, I can't say, there are very few times you can say with authority something is or something isn't, right? I mean, that's a pretty high level of data requirements in science. But what you can say is, we're less wrong and we're more right, and these are the dimensions and this is why. And I think that has resonated with some of our audiences because then they are a participant. They also see that you're not trying to pull something over on them, right? I mean, as soon as they smell, oh yeah, we left that data set out or we eliminated this point, that creates a problem. So I think we want to be less wrong and more right paradigm, and every visualization you do after that continues to build to the more right. That conversation can often be helpful.
I think this is kind of going to, the data governance piece and also the scope of what your product is trying to do. So if you define it well, you make a good informed decision on it, I think you avoid the trap of losing data. So for example, you first want to know what type of things are you trying to make available to users. So define the metrics maybe that you want to display to them, and also what dimensions do you want to use or to have available for users to be able to use. So for example, if I want to look at my total number, how many users my product has, right? But then somebody might want to know how many desktop users versus mobile users I have. So that's probably you should have a device dimension that allows you to do that. Because if you don't, you might think your product is flat, but what you might be seeing is desktop is declining, mobile is growing. So if you provide enough of a set of dimensions, so you define your metadata in such a way that allows you to discover all the different drops-offs or increases in data, that's kind of what you have to do. And so define the scope of your product. What are you trying to measure? What kind of dimensions you're going to use to represent it? Maybe how much historical data you want to make available, etc. And with the data governance, it's all again about defining the standards. How you make sure that all the different products or different areas where you're collecting data from, that you're collecting the right data. If you do well on those two things, I think even though you aggregate, you're still not going to lose the insight that you need. So you're still not going to hide bad stuff, but you have tools that will allow you to see what you need to see.
Thank you. And I think we want to have a couple minutes for questions from the audience. So do we have any questions?
Here, I'm going to bring you the mic.
So back to the topic of moving beyond visualization and enabling some of the more of that advanced analytics. You had mentioned that as a strategy to get to that advanced analytics using self-service. Can you elaborate on any other strategies to enable that more of the advanced analytics?
For us, we're not there, but we're getting there. And the ways that we've incorporated that is, one, we have extremely strong business partnerships now, where it used to be the business would throw, here's what I need over the wall, whenever you get it done, get it back to me. We don't, back to the last question as well to that, we don't pre-aggregate anything unless the business makes the decision that there's an aggregation that needs to take place. But the other thing in the advanced world that is brand new for our organization, we talk in degrees of certainty and directional results. Those two things are a very hard thing for people to stomach, but if we can get them there, in the advanced world, you have to understand that it's not 100% degree of certainty many times, and be comfortable with that for decision making. That's helped us out significantly.
I would also add, if I could, if we went back to the pig farmer energy consumption example, in a perfect world, he'd be able to say, Alexa, how can I reduce my energy consumption? And she would tell him. To bridge that gap, we need to be able to have the intelligence, the artificial intelligence, of interpreting that visual data like a human would to be able to infer the results. So we're nowhere near being able to do that, but ultimately that would be the goal.
Yeah, so for us, besides a UI tool that you can visualize data, we also have APIs so anybody can access them programmatically with ease. So the next step with that is to maybe build a bot that can basically take a question, translate it into an API query and get the data back, and then to an example he just mentioned about Alexa, taking voice commands and translate into the API calls, so you can kind of move away the need from UI. You can just say, hey, how many users I had yesterday? So there's, we have some tools that kind of allow us to go to the next level. We just have to do other development on top of that. So I guess to your question, the original question, besides visualizations, there's stuff you can do either text-based or voice assistant type-based.
I have one more here.
Hi. As organizations move from a culture of gut instinct decision-making into a purely data-driven decision-making model, how can data visualization help avoid some of those pitfalls?
I'll go ahead. Again, the Moneyball example is the gut belief and what I call the gut bias towards output. So for us, again, the development of the partnerships with the business so that they can recognize the output and their own bias towards that is probably one of the biggest challenges that we've really started to overcome. Doesn't happen overnight, but it's one of those, again, on a directional result basis. If you're going to get people beyond that bias, you've got to be able to show results that they have participated in to develop. And that's where I think for us anyway, it's been extremely helpful to get out of that gut feel on business decisions.
So for me, with regards to data-driven parts, there's two pieces that I think helped address the problem. One is you first use the data to know where you are right now, and then based on that, you can then define some goals. I want to grow in this area, or I want to invest in this area, or invest in this area. When you set those goals, throughout the process, use the data to help you measure the performance of your goals. So you don't think you're doing well, but yet you're using your data to show that you're doing well. So you can build dashboard or splashboards, it depends what you want to call it, that, for example, measure goals, right, around certain things, some metrics or measures that you're trying to establish. So next time when you are presenting to your business leader to prove that you are doing well, you use different level, basically you set different KPIs, so key performance indicators that you can use to show, yeah, we are growing traffic, because if you compare our traffic from a quarter before and from a year ago, we're growing in this area, etc. So I think that's kind of how I would answer that.
Okay. Well, so this concludes the panel and also concludes the morning session. There will be a little break for a little while. So let's thank our distinguished panel again.